The Torah portion this week, for those of us not living in the land of Israel, is Parshat Shelach. And it records its main storyline is the sending out of 12 spies to investigate and scout out the land. And this is recorded here in detail. It's referred to again in chapter 1 of Devarim and Deuteronomy, and it echoes what ultimately happens later on when Moshe himself sends out spies, and when Joshua, at the beginning of the book of Joshua in chapter 2, sends out spies. So these expeditions of spies, as we're going to see this week, are very fraught with great danger and risk, because here we are 1 year out of the Exodus from Egypt, and the Jewish people are on the move, and we've described that the book of Bamidbar is the Jewish people camped in an orderly, organized way, the entirety of the Jewish people in the world, all of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, living together with a Mishkan at the center, and now they're on the move to head into the land of Israel. And this movement, although it sounds very grand and very beautiful to think about, and its progress, it's literally the fulfillment of the world taking place, which goes all the way back to the words when God spoke to Avram in the very beginning of Jewish history, Lech lecha, go to the land I will show you. So now we have a few million Jews having experienced the Exodus, having organized themselves, stood at Sinai, had the setback of the worshiping the golden calf, now reorganized, having a Mishkan, a house of God at their center, and they're ready to move on. And the way the Torah reads here is that Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, send out men, leaders, if you please, and let them spy out the land of Canaan. Even though when Moshe retells the story later, it sounds as though that the idea came from the people. So there's technicalities to understand here. But let's look at the disastrous effects that take place. And hence we have the title of this class, Righteous or Rogue, because we're going to look deeply within the sense of determining what's right and what's wrong, and how the dynamics of people can work against them and in their favor. That's going to be the theme we're going to pursue in this class. In any event, 12 righteous leaders of the Jewish people, all having experienced firsthand the 10 plagues in Egypt, all having experienced the splitting of the sea, all having stood at Mount Sinai and heard with their own ears Hashem speaking the 10 commandments to the Jewish people. They're sent forth. They spend 40 days in the land. They come back, and they have a split report. 2 of the 10, Yehoshua, the devoted student to Moshe, and Kalev, also a very righteous person who we're going to encounter several times more in the course of the narrative of the Torah and the Navi. They come back ready to go and have with their report in hand. The majority, the 10 others, come back, and they give initially an accurate report. They bring back fruits of the land as demonstrations of what they found, and then they wreak havoc on the Jewish people by pulling the wool out from under their feet and disheartening them and demoralizing them, and leading to the delay of 40 years for the Jewish people to actually enter the land of Israel, and the commemoration forever of the day of Tisha B'Av, of the 9th of Av, as being the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, because the Jewish people cried and they bemoaned their fate. And as the Medrash says, God's response was, if you're going to cry for nothing, then I'll give you a reason to cry about. And hence we know throughout Jewish history, destruction of the first temple, destruction of the second temple, even as recently as the initiation of World War I, which happened with the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand, which according to many Jewish thinkers was a domino falling, which immediately but resulted in Hitler coming to power and the Holocaust and World War II taking place. That also happened on Tisha B'Av. The Tisha B'Av becomes a day, not of foreboding, it's a day when we come to reckon with the blown opportunities, the tremendous opportunities that we had in having a first temple and a second temple, and we long to do the repair work necessary so that we could reattain that status. Okay, that's the overall arc of narrative here. It's a sad one, and the decree is that every member of the Jewish people from the age of 20 and up who are responsible for their actions, morally responsible, they're going to die in the wilderness, they're not going to see the land, and only those too young to be held accountable and those who will be born during the ensuing 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, only those people will go into the land. And as the Torah concludes with Moshe passing away on the cusp of the Jewish people entering the land, and the book of Joshua, the first book of the prophets, explains to us the Jewish people enter the land under the leadership of Joshua. They conquer the land, they settle the land, and we spend basically more than 800 years living in the land of Israel until the destruction of the first temple. We spent 70 years in exile. We returned back to the land to build the second temple, and we spend another 420 years living in the land of Israel. And then we're expelled again on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. And here we sit, thankfully, many of us living in the land of Israel, many of us not, still in Galut, still in exile. And should Tisha B'Av happen this summer without us concluding Jewish history before then, we will once again take stock of, as I say, the blown opportunities that have slipped through our fingers and the opportunity that we have before us to repair our relationship with God, our attitude towards Jewish history, our attitude towards the role of the Jewish people in the world, so that we could yet come back and re-enter the land of Israel afresh under the leadership of a Mashiach, of an appointed one of God, and that we could summarize and sum up all the expectations of Jewish history that we hold dear. So this is a very dramatic parsha, consequential, having ramifications to us even at this moment, and I think we have a great deal to learn from it. Now, before the spies go out, and Frank, I think I'm going to rely on you. I have all these sources written out in front of me by chapter and verse, and maybe you'll help me by typing in with the page number, if it's easy for you to do that in the Art Scroll Chumash in terms of where these can be found.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you very much. Good. Little audience participation. That never hurts. But let's look at chapter 13, sentence 16, which I will tell you, I'll beat him to the draw here, page 798, 799 in the Art Scroll Chumash. These are the names of the men whom Moshe sent to spy out the land. Moshe called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Yehoshua, Joshua. Moshe changed his name. And we know Joshua as Joshua, but the fact is that's a name change that Moshe made in sending him out with the spies. Why did Moshe do that? So Rashi brings the Medrash that tells us that Moshe was extremely concerned that his prize student, Hoshea, would come back with a false, misleading, bad report of the land. And in order to protect him, he blessed him by adding a yud, a letter of God's name, to his name to convert his name from Hoshea, which sort of means we shall be saved. And he said, Yehoshua, God will save you even from the perhaps bad influence of the other spies might have on you. You should be, and he bestows this blessing upon him. And as we mentioned before, what's going to end up is that Kalev, without any special blessing, and Yehoshua, Joshua, formerly Hosea, now Joshua, will return back positively ready to attack and to lead the way of the Jewish people into the land. And the other 10 are going to demoralize the people with a negative report. So an obvious question here. Why didn't Moshe bless each of the spies? The names are listed here. Why didn't Moshe reach out to each of them and give them this added protection or advice or input or exactly what the Kabbalistic ramifications are of changing a name? Why did he single out Yehoshua? And of course, it's easy to say, well, it was his student that he was most concerned about, the student. But that's really not an acceptable answer, because clearly Moshe realized that this whole expedition was fraught with tremendous risk and tremendous danger for the Jewish people. And when he recounts it again retrospectively in the book of Deuteronomy, Moshe even says, I was against it. I advised us not to send spies. And after all, if you think about it, it's a chutzpah to send spies. Here you are, the Jewish people, you're amassed, you have a cloud of glory leading you on the way, a pillar of fire at night and a cloud of glory during the day. You're in a miraculous state of affairs. And you say, hold on, let's check out what's ahead. It's like worse than a little kid sitting in the back of the car and saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Because you're being led by God on what clearly is a manifest mission of fulfilling the purpose of the world, fulfilling the meaning of the Exodus and the revelation at Sinai, and being a light unto the nations of the world and changing the course of human history. And you say, hold on, I'm not willing to take another step until I send out some scouts and see what's ahead of us. The whole idea seems spurious and unusual. We're not going to deal with that tonight. But let's stay with this question. What was Moshe thinking when he singled out Yehoshua alone and changed his name in order to protect him from being influenced negatively and bringing back a bad report? Second question, why didn't he do so for all of the spies? And certainly Kalev seems to have succeeded even without it. Another question, what's with these spies? Why did they bring back an evil report? What was motivating them? So I want to mention a Zohar, a Kabbalistic understanding, which is discussed by many of the commentaries, and it's as follows. That subconsciously, these 12 Jewish leaders who were entrusted with this mission, whether it's a fool's mission and it should never have happened, whether it was ordained by God, not perfectly clear from the text, but clearly they were undertaking something extremely important. They knew there were huge consequences. And where would they find the chutzpah to come back and tell the people the land is no good? The land is no good. The land that God sent Abraham to, the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land that the Jewish people abandoned under duress when they went down to Egypt, and then now they're returning to it. So the Zohar Kabbalistically says that deep within the recesses of their psyche, they were impacted by a prejudice, by a selfish interest. And here was their selfish interest. We're leaders, we're big shots. As long as we stay out here in this nice encampment, every morning when we wake up, people are saying, oh, there's the head of our tribe, there's our leader, and they stand up and respect us. But we're going to get to this land and we're going to conquer it, and people are going to spread out and they'll have a farm here and people will be busy with all their business and their affairs. We're going to return to ordinary life. It sort of harps back to George Washington telling the American people that he's ready to not continue being president after 8 years and to return to being an ordinary citizen among citizens. That's what was impacting them. And as we see so clearly in our day and age, a personal bias, the concept of confirmation bias changes everything. So what are they going to do? They're going to see these immense fruits that they brought back with them. Yeah, they were really big. When you take in the old days, when you got to Israel and you got into a tour car, it's much less prevalent today. You'll see a little red sticker on the side, and you'd see 4 people carrying grapes. And that was a depiction of the spies, how wondrous the land was. And we're going to see some of the nuances that they came back with. Well, the fruits are so ginormous. Regular people like us, we can't survive on these extraordinary things. There were giants there. They have a different digestive system. You can't eat a grape that weighs 3 pounds. It's not good for you. The land isn't fit for us. All these kind of weird ideas, but we hear weird ideas all the time nowadays, spoken with conviction. And why? Because we know that that viewpoint is reassuring to me. It somehow satisfies my conscious or subconscious need to become more powerful, to become more famous, to have people look up to me, to be able to take advantage of other people, whatever those motivations are. These were great men, but buried within them was this concern. So why didn't Moshe help them out? So here we're going to use an idea that's quoted from the Dubna Magid, and this structure comes from a written piece by Rabbi Shlomo Yonason Harris a year ago about this parsha. And the Dubna Magid says you first have to understand that there are 2 directions that evil can take. One is the standard form of evil. In other words, I have what's called a negia. I have a prejudice, a bias. I have a personal interest in the matter, and that skews my viewpoint. So when you come to me and say, should I sell my house? And you're the guy living behind me, and I think to myself, wow, I'd love to get that piece of property and expand and take that over. And I tell you, well, it's really a good idea for you to sell your house right now because you're a little older, you could retire. I'm not being honest because I'm not giving you an honest opinion, and why? Only because I'm so biased, because I have a personal interest in wanting to acquire your property. I'm giving you bad advice. And by the way, that's how a person violates the biblical injunction of not placing a stumbling block before the blind. You violate that portion of the Torah by giving bad advice where the other person is blind and they're relying on you and they ask me my advice, and I'm a realtor and I'm a person who knows better than them, but I'm not giving them honest advice in their best interest. I'm giving them honest advice in my best interest. Moshe assumed that that's the normal course of events. Here are 12 great men going out to search out the land, and they're perfectly capable of dealing with such moral challenges. After all, that they've become great. They've overcome such challenges. They've become leaders of the Jewish people by dint, they didn't win the vote, by dint of their personal greatness, their personal achievement. And even if they have these subconscious, conscious prejudices working on them, they'll overcome them, they'll see through them. And on their way back, carrying the big fruits, and they'll say, gee, could I really eat this? Could I digest it? Are those people conquerable? And I say, look, buddy, take yourself a break. Obviously something's bothering you, but it's not rational because this is the land God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We saw all these miracles. We came out of Egypt. Of course, we're going to be able to conquer the land. Fool it, do your job, give your report, and let's go on. But they didn't do that. That was a shocker to Moshe. He was concerned about it. But that type of ill will, that Yetzer Hara, that evil inclination, so to speak, that's what we all deal with every day of our lives. That's what defines us as being good people. That's everyday business, moral business, and moral growth. Let's look at Yehoshua. Yehoshua was faced by a completely different challenge. And this is why Moshe took action. Why? Because if we look back in chapter 11, sentence 26, and here we will rely on Frank to tell us what page that's on.
Looks like 792, 793.
Okay, thank you. So a strange thing happened there. Different context, different situation. But in any event, Moshe, out of despair, asked God, we need a Sanhedrin, we need 70 elders. And God spreading out Moshe's prophetic understanding amongst the people. And lo and behold, two people, Eldad and Medad, you may not have heard of them before, but it's there in the text. They start giving prophecy, and the prophecy upsets Yehoshua. And if you look in the text here, sentence 28, Yehoshua, the servant of Moshe, spoke up and said, my Lord Moshe, incarcerate them, cut them off, do something to stop them from giving prophecy. And Moshe says to them, are you being zealous for my sake? Would that the entire people of God should be prophets. Moshe again takes this big, encompassing viewpoint. And what does Rashi tell us from the Medrash there? They were in fact giving prophecy that Moshe himself would die before the Jewish people enter the land of Israel. Truth. And Yehoshua doesn't say they were lying, they were giving a prophetic vision, but it troubled him. So here Moshe, with this in context, thinks to himself the following thing. There are 12 spies going out. I'm going to count on them sorting out confusing data and information and coming back with a report which will be acceptable and encouraging to the Jewish people so that we can march on and we can move into the land of Israel, come what may. But my dear student Yehoshua, because he's so close to me and so devoted to me, and because he's so concerned on a spiritual level that every day that I, Moshe, am alive, I can give more Torah, more clarity to the Jewish people, I'm afraid that his prejudice to delay the Jewish people going into the land on my behalf, which is what we call l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. It's not a personal bias, but it's a holy bias. Such a bias is much more difficult to overcome. And therefore, I need to intercede on his behalf. And I'm going to change his name from Hosea to Yehoshua. I'm going to add that Yud to his name, so that God should protect him from any viewpoint which is going to undermine his moral clarity in bringing back a report that encourages the Jewish people to march onto the land. So we have here a tremendous insight into how we work as people. We can do wrong. We can be rogue in two ways. We can become rogues by giving into our own personal agenda. Like, hey, it's pretty cool being one of the 12 leaders of the Jewish people, sitting in the front of the shul, getting all the good aliyahs, whatever other benefits leaders get. And therefore, we're going to skew the data. And when we bring back these big grapes, we're going to say we're going to choke on these grapes. They're not good for us. Big people eat them. Giants, and if they're giants, also it means those are the people we're going to be fighting against. But we're ordinary people. We can't handle this stuff. That's one evil inclination that these 10 succumb to. But there's another type of evil inclination. And that's when the evil inclination rouses my righteousness and my goodness and uses it against me, makes me into a person imbued by the notion that there's nothing more important than Moshe living another day to lead the Jewish people. And if I have to lie, cheat, steal, consciously, unconsciously, whatever it takes, but if I'll do whatever it takes to keep Moshe here, even defy God Almighty's plan, because it's the right thing to do. So I become a righteous rogue. I take it upon myself to be a person who knows better. I become a disruptor, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, But of course, it's not for the sake of heaven. It's not God's plan. It's not what God wants to see unfolding. Who am I to say that my interest in being a big tzaddik and being a very righteous person, I have a right to twist and turn? And so, whereas if you just put in your head the idea that 12 spies went out, 10 of them were struggling inside against their own interest in being honorable and leaders and having other people respect them, and they succumbed to that. Kalev, apparently, he saw through everything, came back with a good report, tells the people, let's go to the land. It's ours for the conquering. We have nothing to fear. We saw the miracles in Egypt. We saw the sea split. Believe me, we were in a much less advantaged position in Egypt when we were enslaved, and God rescued us. God can certainly rescue us again when we enter the land of Israel. Kalev saw through it clearly. Yoshua had this vulnerability. Moshe knew, I need to intercede on his behalf, because otherwise his very goodness is going to be seized by the Yetzer Hara, by the evil inclination, and he will come, what we're going to call here as just a term, a righteous rogue. And as is discussed in the literature, a righteous rogue never realizes he's doing wrong. If I succumb to honor, prestige, power, other things, in the course of normal human events, knocks and everything else, I'll come to my senses and I'll say, oh God, I'm doing wrong. I realize now those grapes I brought back, and I saw them as so detrimental. I saw them as so terrible. Oh, they were there to inspire us. Eventually, even if I choose wrongly, even if I come under that influence, I can straighten myself out. But when I encase my rogue sense of taking history into my own hands and protecting my connection to Moshe's for the good of everybody, that is almost impossible to ever see through. It's very hard for a person to correct it. And the Torah is opening our eyes here to the dynamics of human beings. And as much as we have to introspect and understand ourselves and come to grips with the idea that we have prejudices, we have agendas, we have proclivities that are working on us all the time, and we have to question ourselves so that we can see through them and that we can find the proper path in life. And so often we're able to do that. And even if we're not able to do it at the first try, we get to it on the second try. Be also aware that there's an insidious Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, that reaches in and activates your most holy aspect of yourself. And that's when havoc really can erupt. That's what Moshe understood. That's why he changed Yeshua's name in order to protect him. I have a lot more to say about the dynamics that happened here for the other 10, but I want to make an application here. This is a real issue. It's not a fanciful issue. In my opinion, we see this type of evil inclination wreaking havoc within families on a regular basis. And I want to explain the dynamic. And there's many, many variations to this theme, but we'll use a simple one. A boy is born. You have a bris milah. You hold up the baby, you say, Zeha Kotan Gadol Yihiyeh. This little one, he should become great. What do we want for our children? We want them to become great. Of course we do. We're raising them. We're developing them. So great means different things to each one of us. Let's take a simple example. I want him to become a great Rosh Hashiva. I want him to become a teacher of Torah. I want him to become a mini Moshe Rabbeinu who really opens the eyes of the Jewish people and opens the eyes of the world to truth and wholesome living and goodness and everything else. So that's motivating me. I'm interacting with my kid. And I see, lo and behold, God gave me a kid who the IQ isn't as high as Moshe's probably was. Or he gave me a kid who is reckless or mischievous or jealous or petty or whatever the deal is. And I start berating the child. How can you act this way? And I have to be willing to open my eyes and say to myself as the father, is my interest the good of my child, which is my responsibility as a father, to lay out for him a path that'll be suitable for him or her? If I have a daughter, all the same dynamics apply. Am I cognizant of their own individuality? Am I willing to say to myself, okay, Zeh Katan Gadol, yeah, this little one will become great, but not necessarily great in the way I expected. Maybe not able to hit a baseball 420 feet like I can, or maybe not able to explain a passage in Talmud the way that Rabbi Moshe Feinstein could, or whoever the person I admire is. But am I still there for the child, or does my Yetzer Hara, my own desire for pride and glory and honor and respect and whatever, arrogance, start playing itself out in the image of my child? And then I start berating the child. And it's interesting, I saw quoted by Reb Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the author of the Mesilat Yesharim, The Path of the Just, as saying that very often righteous indignation causes a person to rebuke someone when it's not the right time, it's not the right place, it's without understanding of the individual that you're concerned about. Why does that happen? And he really relates it to this idea, because it's not really for that person's sake. And of course, what do we know? We know very well that our children see through us, and they can understand, is Dad concerned about me, or is he concerned about himself? Is he out for my best interest, or does he want to look good in the eyes of the neighbors? Is it, and I'll tell you, you see it in a funny way, and I'll just tell you this in a very lighthearted way, and please don't apply it to anybody that you or I may know. But sometimes, we have daughters. Sometimes our daughters marry the child of a famous person. And oftentimes you see the parents of the girls even say, oh, look at the daughter I raised. Wow, she's the future of the Jewish people. She's the future of whatever. Same issue applies between boys and girls. And you laugh and say, your child is not the person they married. And B, even if your child is great, your child earned that, worked for it, developed themselves, faced their own moral challenges, overcame them. Give your child some credit. Don't just look at it as how it accrues to you. In a funny way, sometimes you'll go to shul and you'll see somebody sitting there, my son, he's the one sitting in the front. He's the president of the shul. Okay, it's very nice. Hopefully he's doing a good job on behalf of the community. Hopefully he's sincere. It's certainly something to be proud of. But it's not something that changes who you are. You have to be extra careful as parents today. Our children oftentimes challenge us, push our buttons, as we say, in ways that drive us mad and that touch us very deeply. And the only way we can really discharge our responsibilities as parents is if we have that insight that Moshe had about his very dear student, Yoshua, and said, 12 spies are going out. 11 of them will have their own challenges. But you, Yehoshua, you're going to have a challenge coming from the other direction, where your very vision for upholding the greatness of the Jewish people and wanting to secure a wonderful future for the world is going to mislead you. And you need God's help in order to see through that. And please, God, each of us, as we live our lives, as we raise our children, as we go through the daily moral, spiritual, financial, interpersonal challenges of life each and every day of our lives, we should see to it that we recognize our evil inclination for what it is. And when it comes from a small, selfish place, we identify it for what it is, we challenge it, and we move on from it. And when it comes from a good place, quote unquote, when it comes from misappropriating it, we have to realize that it's as dangerous as a person overdosing on a medicine that they need. Because after all, if I'm supposed to take 2 of these tablets every day, how much more so could I take 4? Righteousness also needs to be scrutinized. At times it needs to be held in check. At times it needs to be seen through for what it really is. And please, God, we should benefit from the interaction that Moshe took with his prized student Yehoshua. And God should also give us the insight to know when our righteousness and our high-mindedness and our concern for good things doesn't lead us astray. And with that, we should really find us and the world really reaching the promised land in a good time and fulfilling everything that Torah holds out for us. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.